Hello, everybody, and thanks for joining us at this CISO's Roundtable talking about automated security validation and metrics for cyber resilience. I'm Nir Loya Dahan. I'm the VP of Product at Simulate, and I want to welcome two of our very, very strategic partners and customers. I'm going to let them actually introduce themselves. The first is Dan Bayless. You want to introduce yourself real quick?
Hi everyone. So I'm the Chief Information Security Officer at LV. I've been in information security and cyber resilience for the last 12 years now, and sort of worked across multiple sectors as well. So yeah, really, this is a hot topic for us. So excited to be here.
Awesome, thank you, Dan. And next is Philip Haynes.
Hey everybody, Philip Haynes, work for Hitachi Energy. I am our Global Architecture and Engineering Manager within cybersecurity. The strong background, years in experience in IT infrastructure, transitioned over to cybersecurity several years ago, and I'm excited for the talk today.
Thank you, guys. So I'm going to start the discussion that we have with, I think, one of the most interesting questions everybody in this community, especially in your strategic roles, ask themselves. If I may ask, what are your biggest changes have you seen in your role, in the CISO's role, over the last years? Dan, let's go with you first.
Okay, so I think for me, the biggest one is it's definitely less pushing, and I think there's more pull from the business. I think with COVID accelerating the digital adoption across multiple generations, I think that people appreciate the need for things to be secure. I also think you're kind of starting to see that now with cyber resilience being a common theme across the agenda for global regulators. It's really sort of driving that deeper board engagement and focus. So again, they want you to come and tell them the story, where we are, where we're resilient, what threats we're facing. I think also kind of seen this again a change in reporting lines as well. Sort of, I personally report to the COO and become like the critical friend of the CIO, kind of being that challenge that you have around that, because sort of conflicting agendas, where they're on uptime and budgets, where we want things fixed immediately and patching immediately. But yeah, I think half of it is really just the storytelling as well. People are actually interested, so it's definitely a positive thing.
Mm-hmm. And Philip?
Yeah, I think the CISO role's changed a lot from traditionally being more of a technical role, very close aligned and almost reporting to the CIO organization for a long time, and it's really transitioned to becoming more of a business leader, right? Getting much closer to the business, not focusing and working almost in a technical isolation role, but becoming somebody that's able to do that can provide the technical speak, but also speak to business leaders in a way that they understand and make sure that the cyber strategy really relates to business strategy. And it's not IT or typically security traditionally would be considered almost part of IT, but it's not IT working in isolation, but security really undergirding and really being driven by the business strategy and supporting those goals.
And actually, as a follow-up question on that, Philip, you also mentioned about the business more oriented into security. And I guess one of the biggest drivers is also about the organization being compliant to regulations, and new regulations coming up with the SEC regulation in the US, with NIS2 in Europe. Philip, how is that impacting your role, your day-to-day?
Well, I think at a very simple level is to be very transparent and being honest about the current cyber risk within the organization, right? I think one of the biggest mistakes is, almost a fear of articulating what the true risk is, in what the reaction to that would be, and almost downplaying it when it's actually much worse than, in some cases, than what you may articulate it. I think that's a mistake and a problem. Being honest and candid about the cyber risk really empowers senior leadership and the executives to make the effective decisions that they need to make in order to address those risks, and support the CISO in giving him or her what they need to be successful in their role, right? And so there's a big drive, especially with the SEC requirements coming out now, that if you're creating a perception externally that's not reflective of reality, you're setting yourself up and your organization up for a very, very hard time.
100%. Dan, how about you?
Yeah, so whilst the SEC doesn't affect us, we're sort of a UK company, but it's definitely, I think driving transparency is only a good thing. I think sort of the encouragement and use of frameworks, still think the importance of reporting is essential, but again, there's still the word on material. So that sort of leaves a little bit open to interpretation on what that means for an organization. But I think just forcing through to have a complete security control set, again, I think that again, it just helps give you that structure, those sort of frameworks. So I think it's only a good thing, and obviously will embed over time.
Yeah. If I can add one thing, I think, especially if we look at some of the very well-known companies that were involved before, in security incidents before the SEC new requirements came out. There's a lot of finger pointing and a lot of finger pointing as well as a lot of weight on the CISO's shoulders, right? And everybody's holding the CISO directly responsible for the situations that may occur. If there's a breach and definitely there is a responsibility on the CISO's shoulders, but security is not just a CISO problem or a security problem. It's an everyone problem, right? And your CISO is your cyber risk manager for the organization, and it's that person's responsibility to ensure that the risks are made known and are clearly articulated to executive management, who really are the ones that accept that risk, right? And so it's the responsibility is on the entire organization, right? The CISO needs to make sure that that's communicated, they accept the risk, and obviously empower the CISO to be able to protect the organization effectively to meet those business targets.
Yeah, actually, that's one of the biggest challenges, and you two mentioned about kind of bridging the gap between the technical language, the technical lingo, where your teams are in the weeds all day, and then you need to communicate it back to the business owners. What kind of challenges have you faced, when communicating with those non-stakeholders, non-technical stakeholders, and how did you overcome those challenges that you talk about? Phil, go ahead.
Sure. I think know your audience, right? Don't use a bunch of technical jargon when you're speaking to an audience that wouldn't understand that, right? Keep it simple. I'm a simple person, and so I try and use analogies or metaphors or something to articulate the message to people that are especially senior management that aren't necessarily they're not familiar with the technical speak or the technical jargon. Break those findings down to actual tangible information that makes sense to the people that you're speaking to.
Mm-hmm. Dan, what do you think?
Again, yeah, really it's getting those complex messages across in a compelling way. It's using the tooling, and for us, it's really tailoring it to who's attacking. We're in the financial sector, so they're interested to see who's attacking us. So again, we can using the data to sort of tell that story. So being able to sort of compare us, rank ourselves against other financial services companies, but really you just have to tailor it to your audience. So if you're in a risk committee, you need to talk about control coverage, control effectiveness. You need to talk about how you're managing residual risk. They're the kind of things they're interested in. Because again, whilst it's the biggest topic for all of us, it's one topic that they're talking about. So again, to the point, it's really making sure we distill down those key messages.
And actually, as a follow-up to Dan, what you said, how do you tie the results of those? You talked about controls coverage, which often ties to investment. How do you convey that connection between the investment and the business, the actual business outcomes, and in the terms that would matter to the audit committee or the board or whatever?
So really, for us, we've taken it away. So again, come back to know your audience. So from the board's perspective, again, it's telling it in a way that we roll up a kind of like a metric around security coverage and tooling. But for us, we can evidence using Simulate. We can trend. We can show the data sort of pre-implementation, sort of post tuning, and going through. We target sort of 10, 12 really active threat actors targeting services. And again, we've taken a dashboard that was very red, being honest. And we can then show where we've made the investments, made those changes for our security program, and how they've gone greener over time, and how it's done. We kind of go on to another topic. We're constantly tuning, constantly changing as the different actors. Obviously, where that changes anyway, but then we can tell that story quite quickly. And again, it's where we've worked with Simulate to really kind of get that feedback to them to kind of say, this is really good, but help me tell the story. So aligning it to the frameworks, using scoring, using RAG statuses, those sorts of things. But again, it's really the biggest point I would say, again, is just touch what Philip said earlier. It's know your audience and tell the story that they need to understand.
Mm-hmm. Makes sense. Philip, what do you think?
Yeah, I think it helps to also what are you trying to accomplish, right? What are the outcomes that you want, and then almost work backwards from those, and be able to show the value in what you're doing and to meet those outcomes, right? Show financial, that there's reduced financial impact to the business because of being able to limit the effect of incidents that may happen. Faster incident responses. That there's high productivity within the team because you're becoming more efficient. Like Dan said, with tools like Simulate, that you're able to do a lot of stuff automated that makes your team more efficient. And use that data to further drive the investment into your security tooling as a value to the company and as a value for those outcomes that you're trying to accomplish in supporting the business.
Makes sense. And actually, that's a good segue. Maybe ask the two of you, what's the role of offensive security testing with a tool such as Simulate in your move to kind of adopt to the changes in the role, to the change requirements or interests from the board, from the business to support the new processes that you're implementing? How does Simulate fit into those processes?
So sort of jump in on that one. I think for me that if not, it's a risky strategy deploying security controls and assuming that they're effective and assuming that they're preventing those threats. So kind of having this in a way that really you can continually test against all active sort of TTPs and going through that kind of thing. But for me, it's when you start the synergies you get between your investments. So again, it's in overlaying, like I touched on earlier, about your threat intelligence, because that allows you to do that bespoke testing and really allows you to assess for vulnerabilities. It's so many different ways. It touches so many different areas. Like it overlays supporting your penetration testing, your red team testing, purple team testing. It really gives you that complete view and that continuous kind of data-driven view. It really allows you to have conversations that sort of takes the emotion out, because the data is the data. If the gap's there, the gap's there, kind of thing. So again, it's really it just gives you. And it touched on something else. Philip said it also gives your teams interesting things to do as well. This is interesting. Yeah. So it's an investment in people.
Actually, can you, if I pick up on that, can you give me like a nice high-level example of how offensive testing approach affected an outcome of your team that you can later on talk to the business stakeholders about?
Yeah. So I'm like to one that we have someone in my team who's dedicated to using this tool, and it pairs quite nicely when you use a continuous control monitoring tool as well, because again that sort of starts to cover your control coverage. We do sample-based testing, and for us, from a reporting perspective, it allows us to go and talk to those sort of stakeholders and tell the story that sort of shows where your gaps are, where you're working through them, but also there's other benefits like we had in a sort of previous life where for a change, we inadvertently an IT colleague opened us up to quite a lot of security exposure. So it's one of those, it's a secondary benefit, it's not something you'd expect to see, but then all of a sudden we start seeing some strange scores, and it just allowed us to reverse engineer it back. So again, it's really, there's lots of benefits and not obvious ones of having this tooling, but again, biggest one is being data driven.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Phil, what do you think?
Yeah, no, I mean, I agree obviously with everything Dan said. In our situation, I know that, there were instances where running continuous tests on on some of the modules, one day started highlighting that, a service account was created that's got access way beyond what it's supposed to. And we were able to actually do some spraying, and we were able to quickly, plug that, where you might not necessarily have known about that, if you don't do that continuous testing in various targeted tests to pick up that stuff. A tool like this is, I almost see it as the big brother for your tooling, to make sure that your tooling does its job. Your controls that are in place are actually doing what they're supposed to be doing, identifying your gaps and prioritizing. And that's the other thing, is identifying the gaps in your protection, your controls, and then looking at what you're finding and prioritizing those, obviously, to make sure that the ones that are most critical are addressed, first and are quickly done. Proactively identifying and remediating your vulnerabilities, facilitating your red teaming exercises, your penetration testing, making sure that those gaps are closed before they're actually exploited.
Mm-hmm. Makes perfect sense, and it's interesting to kind of pick up on the controls tuning part, because that's something both of your teams, and probably most, if not all, of the security teams in the world are doing on a day-to-day basis. Not because the tools are not working well, because the landscape is changing, the business requirements are changing, and so I wanted to ask you how offensive testing help you in the face of changing, ever-evolving business requirements, and how does it help you ensure that as the business evolves, you ensure the security for the business?
I'll go first. Just to echo what I just said, I think it's very, again, identifying those gaps, right, and prioritizing them, making sure that you're able to plug the vulnerabilities and the holes that there are before they're exploited. We're working in an environment, like you said, that it's becoming more and more complex all the time, and manual work and manual effort that may have worked 10 years ago is not cutting it anymore. With the advent of AI, initiated attacks, and every security tool you can think of now having AI built into them, to counter that, we're not going to get away from it, and we might as well embrace it in a very smart way to be able to counter those things and leverage as much automation as possible, right? And so red teaming, like I said, red teaming exercises, going through actually you targeting your own environment to see where your weaknesses are, is a much better strategy, obviously, to plug those holes and then wait for those things to be exploited, for sure.
Absolutely, I sort of agree. And I think one of the things it's just making sure that you've got all the basics covered, because this is the thing. As much as you hear about the advanced attacks, they all come in from basic avenues, the majority. So I think making sure you've locked those down, tuning examples where we've gone through looking at inbound email attachments, the attachment types, and really it's getting to the point where we've tuned the approach we take. You don't want people like his executive assistants to his CEO being targeted and sent PowerShell scripts. There's just no need to have those kind of things sent to them. So again, what it's allowed us to do is really, and again, having the dashboard view that you get, showing those where we've got the file attachments, where it's ISOs, where we're just literally trying to make it harder for actors and cyber criminals to compromise us, and really hopefully be in a way that if that happens, you can go, I hadn't thought of that. I've got a credible story for my board and for my regulators. When I sit there and go, genuinely, what more could I have done? We've done this. We're continually testing and assessing our controls and pivoting and evolving them. So, yeah, I think there's a lot of it. It's the basics. And cyber attacks only happen in majority only come either email or web. So if you can, and your endpoint controls, and if you can make sure that they're as secure as they can be, then you're making it a bit harder for them, which is all we can do.
100%.
And I think that it also helps to drive your cyber investment, because when you're constantly testing, and especially with an automated tool like Simulate, you're able to see what works and what doesn't work, right? If there are certain things that you have implemented and maybe there's a better way or a better solution out there to address those, it'll help drive the message for more effective cyber investment to the business, which business leaders will obviously also appreciate. You becoming more efficient from a technical perspective, from your people, from the investment perspective, and from many angles, right?
Actually, as a follow-up question on that, like you talk about the value and the benefit, and at the end of the day, how it helps. What kind of security validation metrics do you implement when you present to executive leadership, present to the board? What like the actual metrics that you use in order to convey that message? Maybe Dan, start with you.
Yeah, so as I sort of touched on before, we sort of split out the question into an executive team and to the board. So from an executive team, we have a forum called the Business Resilience Forum. We were part of getting that created, and cyber resilience is a top agenda point in there. It's broken down into sort of the classic vulnerability management kind of oversight, but also threat intelligence. And like I touched on earlier about bringing your tooling together, we report on 10 to 12 top threat actors targeting our sector, so it's relevant to our exco and their team. And what it's allowed us to do is that we can measure and evidence our control improvements. We can show them the data, we can show them the scores, we can show when something goes wrong, kind of thing. What was the blip? What did we do? And yeah, it was as I said, sort of touched on earlier. It started very red, and we had low resilience to some of the threats. But now, through that ongoing tuning and oversight and testing, we've gone. It's gone far greener, and we can have a really compelling conversation. And then coming back to the board again, we have to roll it up. This is really low level detail for a board, as I touched on before. They're going through many topics when they're meeting. So again, we provide a rolled up metric in this context that is around security tooling coverage. Yes, it's a quantitative assessment using sort of SME judgment. But again, it's one of those, it's not like a vulnerability count number. You can go, it's here, you can see it's trending in the right way. But yeah, it's there to start the conversation. It's not there to sort of stand up in its own right, but really just focus on security tooling coverage.
Makes sense. Philip?
Yeah. Again, I don't necessarily directly report to the board, but at the same in the same breath, stuff that's tangible, right? What are the results of an external third-party penetration test? Were they able to breach our environment? How secure are we from that perspective? Are our internal vulnerability scans trending downward? How's our patching activity going? Is it effective? Showing stuff like trend analysis, showing improvement. Phishing campaigns, the human factor. People are always still the weakest link in every organization. Even the best of us sometimes fall for too quickly clicking on something that we shouldn't be clicking on, and creating that awareness within the organization and what is the status, providing reports to executive management on phishing campaigns and security awareness, and making sure that the general user base is educated on those things.
Makes sense. And so before I'm going to move to questions from the audience, I have two final questions from the distinguished members of the panel. The first question is, what kind of suggestion or guidance would you give to another security leader that either hasn't incorporated BUS or looking to incorporate BAS or an offensive security testing tool in their cybersecurity program? Philip?
Sure. Okay. Like I said earlier, I see this tool kind of as big brother of your other tooling. If you don't have a way to test your own tooling and effectively test your own controls, how do you know that they're really going to be as effective as they need to be? It's a practical and a tangible way to effectively test your security controls on an ongoing and automated basis. And it gives you clear data to improve where you need to improve, right? If there's things that aren't doing the job effectively, then you have tangible data to drive that business case to make a change. And you're able to in an easier way identify where your gaps are.
Dan?
Yeah, absolutely. And we look at it similarly. We use slightly different language. So I look at it as make sort of breach attack simulation your critical friend. So you can be confident in the security controls and investments are effective. I think for me, so it's about not thinking you're secure. It's about knowing you're secure, knowing the gaps are, more importantly. And ultimately, what I would probably say, being really candid, is take accountability. Kind of stop talking about it and do it. This is about evolving your sort of threat intelligence and vulnerability management story, and then really start to tell those insights. So like prioritize vulnerability management, those sorts of things. But this is not new, I would absolutely say. And the biggest thing I would say to a security leader is this is a security control. It's on your side. It's on your shoulder. I kind of put it in my head. My other security controls are on one side of it. I'm on one side of it with simulating. Actually, again, we're just constantly hitting those controls to prove that they are secure, rather than, oh, I bought X, therefore I'm okay, because there's plenty of silver bullets out there that lots of salespeople will sell you. So for me, it's making sure that actually we can evidence it. But then, the biggest one is, as I said, is know you're secure or not, kind of thing, and go from there.
Makes perfect sense. And if I'm continuing it, Dan, is there any actionable tip for that other security leaders can implement if they want to improve communication with stakeholders, with or without Simulate, for that matter?
I'll split it into two sections. With Simulate, I would certainly say it's honestly just comes back to what I was saying about you need an ingress point. So start with the basics, using these kind of tools. Don't take every module. I'm sure the Simulate sales team won't appreciate me saying that, but for me, start small and build out, prove capability, really targeting, as I said, your email, web, and endpoint controls, because nearly all attacks, even the advanced ones, start at that ingress point, so knowing that they're secure. And then the other thing I would say, and not just Simulate, but we were touching earlier about continuous control monitoring, is share your toys. Don't come to security to be asked if you're secure. Give access to your IT team, let them self-serve, let them go and look in there, because we're only small teams, and you quickly become a bottleneck if you're being asked to wait. Oh, can you run a vulnerability scan? Give them access to themselves. Let them run their own scans. Let them see their own. Absolutely, our role is oversight, but it's share your toys, I would say, as well.
Yeah, and I'll tackle it from a slightly different angle, not necessarily from the tooling perspective, but to echo what Dan's saying in sharing your toys, relationships are key, right? Build your relationships with different stakeholders within the organization. When you're at that level with people that they know you, they know your intent, you can be honest. You should be honest and candid anyway, but people will respond much better in a way when they know that they can trust you within the organization. And keep it simple. Again, understand your audience. Speaking to my team is a much different message than speaking to my boss or my boss's boss, right? They don't care about the detailed information. And then obviously speaking to people outside of IT, especially senior leaders, that's a different conversation, but those relationships are key.
Makes perfect sense. And I would add actually that like from all the discussions that we make with our clients, the biggest big thing that pops into mind, that being transparent as much as possible and having that handshake with the business stakeholders, making sure there is an actual agreement. There's a contract between the cybersecurity team and the business owner as to the investment we are willing to make in security and how does that translate into security level. And once that agreement, that contract is acknowledged by both sides, now we can have a meaningful discussion on how should we expand the coverage, where should we expand the coverage, and knowing what the coverage is to begin with is key to manage this discussion. And so there's actually a couple of questions from the audience. The first question coming up is, how often do you run the continuous assessments in your environment to test that coverage? So either one of you want to take this?
I can take it. Right now, the way our environment's set up, we're obviously, we're a big manufacturing organization. And so we have in many cases, different environments that are isolated from the general corporate network or whatever. And so we will target a certain area for a specific purpose at times. Other times there'll be a request to come in. And so we do fairly frequent as part of our overall penetration testing team and our threat intelligence team. Do obviously tests on our general security controls on a fairly frequent basis. But we also do a lot of targeted tests because controls may be different in some of the other pockets of the area of the network. Where there may be a factory that is has an environment that's disconnected, but we want to make sure that they're effectively protected. We'll go and do those ad hoc. So it all depends on the nature of the request.
Yeah.
So for us, we do similar. We do targeted scanning, and we tested the entire back catalogue of immediate threats. So that took quite a while to work through and kind of pick out the common patterns to sort of close down the gaps there. So there's the bespoke testing point. We'll also kind of go, right, if there is something in the mainstream media, and there's plenty out there, don't need to name names, but we can go to and say, right, is this threat actor group? How resilient are we? Because if it's hitting for us, the news, BBC, Sky News, those kind of forums, our teams make sure that there's an email in the relevant people's mailboxes saying how resilient we are or not, or what we're doing, taking action to close those gaps. Because that's the pulse check. We just need to be able to do is go, right, that threat actor group, are we resilient? Yes, no, work through. So yeah, it's the same. And just touch on the point I made earlier about sample-based testing. It's not an agent we rolled out to every endpoint. We work on the logic that we do sample-based testing. So we've got an image of our endpoints, and we'll continually test it. And again, we use our tooling to make sure that our security controls are consistently deployed. But again, it allows us to do that testing without being impacting to the environment, because it's not like any tool, you can be a little bit zealous and overzealous with these kind of things. So again, it's making sure we protect operations as well, but also again trying to make sure we're secure.
Makes sense. And actually, there's another question that kind of connects to it from the crowd on how do you using automated testing with purple teaming exercises, or are you doing live purple teaming exercises, and are you using Simulate for that with live exercises, or any other constellation? Purple teaming exercises, that's something that keeps on coming up from in the market, and wondering what's your take on that.
We're busy bolstering up that capability, in conjunction with our, incident response teams, as well as our offensive side, to build that up. Up to now, we've not within our organization used it effectively within purple teaming exercises as such, as we're building those things up at the moment.
Amazing.
I think, and to pick up on that one, so we keep them separate. So we in a previous life we've used the lateral movement capability tool to articulate sort of that blast radius, but now it's separate. But again, because it is useful to keep them separate, because at the end of the day, it's testing your security controls and your people as much as it's testing you. So yeah.
Makes sense. And actually, a final question from the audience that regarding remediation. So in your organization, oftentimes it's not just the offensive testing results that drive remediation. It's also about stuff that's coming up from the SOC, from incident response team, from threat hunting teams. How do you incorporate the offensive security testing results within the priority of all the other initiatives, all the other feeds that coming in from the daily security operations in your organizations?
So so again, we sort of use it to translate our current posture and turn those into sort of remediation roadmaps, because some fixes aren't quick or easy. Some aren't just settings that you can go and turn on and off kind of thing. And also you might have some unexpected results by doing that as well. So it's a case of using it, as I said, it's looking at threat intelligence sources, open sources, see who active groups are out there, and then going, actually, are we resilient about this? Because if not, we then raise tickets off to our email provider or web proxy provider or endpoint provider, kind of going, we've got a gap here. Why is the data not marrying up, kind of thing, or why is that threat getting through? So again, it is reactive, but again, it's just the response time is we found coming back into Simulate very quickly. We can raise a ticket, we'll get the attack is then mapped out and through. So yeah, it's useful, really useful to be able to have that data-driven view of it.
Philip?
Yeah, I think I think it depends on your organization size and structure, because I guess in some organizations you have the ability to go and quickly go change, fix something. In some organizations that may be larger, more complex, the responsibility to go remediate or the responsibility to go and fix a finding sits with an application owner or with a system owner versus just with IT. And so for us and for me, it's critical to have an effective risk register, that those things are clearly documented and recorded. It's easy for things to get lost in Excel and in emails and going back and forth, and then you've got no tracking of what was actually done to remediate those things. And next time you test, then they just come up again. So having an effective risk register where these things are logged and tracked to remediation is important. But at the same time, while doing that, very critical findings, while logging them on the risk register, it's also a dangerous thing to just leave it on the risk register and expect somebody to go take care of it. That needs to be prioritized, and maybe some additional manual reaching out to the responsible teams is necessary to get on a call and work together to remediate these things as quickly as possible, depending on how severe that gap is.
Yeah, absolutely echo what Philip said, and it brings it back to what we were talking about when risk committees, boards. You're in there supporting your CIO, kind of going, yeah, we need this continued investment, this continued focus, this continued downtime, patching windows, those sorts of things. You're there kind of going, you want to be secure, you don't want these bad things to happen. You need to get out of people's way to do this sort of stuff, and again, putting accountability back onto business owners, because they own the systems. IT don't. This isn't an IT problem. It's not a security problem. It's an all of us problem. So again, echo what Philip said earlier. But again, just it can give you, as I said, give your other roles the support to help basically be secure.
Actually, this brings a discussion that I often get with CISOs and other clients about the challenge between discussing with security engineers from within the security department and trying to convince the business owner, the application owners, for remediating. Sometimes it could cause downtime or business unavailability. And I kind of wonder, Dan, what you said on how do we convey the importance. Philip, also you mentioned the risk register. How do we fit those offensive security testing results? How do we convey the message that it's important? For example, I've seen in the SOC, I've seen an alert on a vulnerability, and I've seen the prereq for exploiting the vulnerability being met in a specific alert. That's something I can clearly convey the severity or the urgency of doing something with it. But an offensive security testing result indicating something might happen, oftentimes we need to convince the other side. What's the practice for you to get that remediation flow? And especially, Philip, as you mentioned, sometimes you don't want to wait for that next change cycle to be pushed in order to get this done.
I think the sorry, I had this thought formulated in my head and it escaped me. Go ahead, Dan.
I think when I was listening, I think for me, I'd take the view of, well, there's two things. One, we're risk advisors. When we turn and say, look, there's a consequence. If these consequences are within your appetite, that's fine. And sometimes you have an unpopular conversation when you tell people they don't have the authority to do what they think they can. And then also, for me, now I've got the same problem now. I've got the other point I was going to say. It's, I think it's, oh God, it's gone completely out of my thought now. Two things in there. It's thrown me out. But I think the importance, as I said, is literally just kind of saying, look, we can do this. Or, the other point's come back to me now. It's a language point. We never say it, but we always try to avoid the word security incident. We always talk about security events until it's then been triaged and it confirmed that there's exposure. So the kind of relationship that I've got with my sort of senior leadership team, executive team, and board is like, if I turn around and say we need to stop something, they know that it's serious and they buy into me and trust me. But that's based on all those relationships and those sorts of things. So I think it's really important to not be the boy who cries wolf constantly, and actually really kind of try and say, look, if I tell you no, the answer is no. Everything else, we try to take that pragmatism. We try to sit down and understand what people are trying to achieve and get them to do it securely. I get that there's conflicting agendas. I get security is not the only show in town, but at the same time, there's a kind of point where I try and say, if this is serious, it's serious, and I will do it, kind of thing. And they understand that I'm not just going to do that knee jerk. So again, but all of that comes from that bigger relationship you have with the business, and so being pragmatism rather than going and again, you're not doing this, you're not doing that, you're not doing that. You're not part of the conversation at that point. You're far better being off in that way.
Yeah, and my point's come back to me now. But it's coming from an infrastructure background. I've been on the other end of this, right? Yeah. And so it's in organizations, I think security can be seen as a pain, something that's in the way of me being able to do what I want to do, what I need to do to be successful in the, whatever things I need, especially in manufacturing space, right? In an OT environment, you don't have the downtime that you have in an IT environment. You may have, maintenance downtime once or twice a year, sometimes, depending on what happens because of the lost revenue for that period of time. And so traditionally, I think security was seen as kind of being in the way and just being a pain. With the change in the landscape so much and the move of the CISO closer to executive leadership and really supporting the business, I think that message from the executive leadership going down to their people in, look, this is really important. We understand that rather have a scheduled interruption to address an issue than have actual downtime because of an incident and you have so much bigger fallout, right? And it's coming along and not security looking successful and looking good, but really partnering with the business and saying, hey, how can we work with you? How can we help you to do this in the least disruptive way that we possibly can? And build those relationships and be a partner, not the guy with the stick,
Yeah, I think the bit that I would sort of echo that with, and coming back to the first question, what you said about what's changing the CISO role. When I'd go in to brief committees or whatever forum it was, I always ask questions. I don't just assume that there's no knowledge in the room. I always try and say, has anyone been touched by a cyber attack? Because you could be sat there and that person could be a Ned on a huge multi-global company who's been through something. So one of the things I've noticed before you might get in it, I don't know, if there's 8-10 people in the room, you might get one person saying I've done it or been experienced by that, or I was at company X when that happened. Now it's much up more there, like the 4, 5, 6 people in the room are going, yeah, I was at X company, I've been there, seen this. So I think that's why you've already got a bit more natural pull rather than push. But yeah, absolutely. I think just come back to the point as Philip made as well about how, again, similar, come from a technical background. It's trying to do it in a way of going, look, I'm trying to do this in the most minimal route, not just going with the problem. It's almost right. This is the weakness. This is the remediation. So you're helping your IT colleagues get those weaknesses closed off, because if not, it's just like, oh, it's another ticket. Oh, security again coming with more demanding, more patching, or things to be turned off, and they're again measured against uptime. They're measured against budgets, and again, it's that sort of healthy challenge that you just need to try and say, look, this is the stuff we need to do.
100%, and I really relate to kind of like the approach of you'd rather deal this in your own terms and anticipate it rather than spend way more time in dealing it when you have a sword on your neck because of a breach. And that kind of like approach, I really like. That's a great takeaway. I think being ahead of the attacker isn't just being ahead of the attacker. It's about closing the holes and tuning your wall in your own time, and not waiting for an arrow or a spear to breach it. And
and to add to that, I've been in situations where the business will come back and say, well, we don't have money to do this right now. We don't have money to do whatever is needing to be done. And that may be true, and it's hard to find the right, justification to do certain things. However, I've seen it has been interesting that the money is all of a sudden there when there's an incident, and it costs a lot more than what it would have cost in, financial expense, frustration, lost data, all that stuff, right? And so it is something that has to be considered in budgets to make sure that, you know, I think from a bottom line perspective, we never think about the saved cost in doing something. We think of the expense that we're paying for it, because it's not tangible as what the expense is.
No, 100%.
It's like insurance, right? I mean, if you're not going to take out insurance, you're going to end up paying a lot more. You may never need it, but you're going to wish you had it when you do need it.
Exactly. It's hard to quantify the ROI in those terms, but you don't want to quantify the ROI. You don't want to get to the point where you say, I've lost $500 million where I could have spent, let's say, a couple of tens of thousands of dollars in focusing on that very specific pain or whatever. And I really, really relate to that. And I think that's a good takeaway. For me, I would say that as a product manager, I will never deploy a feature to production without proper QA, right? And for me, a bug in a feature means you both are frustrated a bit with the platform, right? For you, not testing your controls means a potential breach and cost way, way, way more. So that's kind of like the analogy that I'm constantly making, and how I'm simplifying it in my head. So makes sense.
It comes back to the very earlier point that, you know, the question that you had asked about the SEC regulations, and not just the SEC, right? All the different regulations. It's that balancing act between, we're telling people that we're at this security level, but we're not wanting to spend the money to actually realistically get to that security level. And so it's such a balancing act, because you need to be transparent, you need to be honest, right? If you're not secure to the extent that you need to be, don't tell people that you necessarily are, because if something happens, or really when it happens, because there isn't such a thing as zero risk, right? When it happens, you need to be able to justify why that happened and what you've articulated or your control measures are.
One of the sort of final point I would make, and sort of come back to some of the previous conversations, is around encouraging a culture as well, where your IT colleagues can self-identify security gaps as well and call it out, and then kind of rewarding that behavior. So one of the things is always kind of like, I think there's a view that we're always on their case, actually. It's the other way around. It's creating that thing going, right, actually, let's help you go and look at that exposure. And again, coming back to having the right tools does help create that ability to measure and assess that. So again, there's lots of different benefits of it, but I think that one it's just a lot is all the relationships.
100%. And actually, about that point, mention something about like that culture of getting this. How do you see that change then in the team, in the culture of the team? Isn't it because some would ask, well, it points to breaches on stuff that might be, you know, under the responsibility of the security team. But Philip, you said there's no zero risk in organization. So then so
give a working example of that, of where we did a tabletop test of basically simulating a destructive cyber attack, and it was assessing the IT team's ability to recover sort of like, you know, the tier 0 infrastructure, making sure security controls are then considered when they're put back in post that recovery. But a lot of it, again, it was very much just constant in mind. Again, this is for you to self-identify gaps. This isn't us trying to catch you out. It's not us trying to make you look silly. Literally, it's an opportunity to go, actually, well, how do you know you can recover Active Directory? When was the last time you did it? When have you got access to the right secrets to do that? Have you got the right recovery documentation? It's those sorts of things. And again, it's just giving that support and focus, and then not penalising them, helping them articulate what the risk is, because they might go, well, I've got this, is a old bit of technology, yeah, but that's the actual risk and impact that can have on the business. And to sort of Philip's point, it's making sure that goes in the right risk register, and it goes through the right governance channels to make sure the people understand the true risk that they're sat on, and being pragmatic around the likelihood, because yes, it could be compromised, because there's the kind of adage of, well, if it's so bad, why hasn't it happened already? And it's going, but it doesn't work like that. It's not discriminatory. They don't care where you are in the world and your IP address. They'll look for it. They look for you. If they can get access to it, then sell it on to someone else who then scope you out and size you up, kind of thing, and then try to work out if you've got the cyber insurance, how much you pay, those sorts of things. So I mean, half of it is just trying to be an ally to everyone, and whether that's business continuity, whether it's operational resilience, whatever that thing is, it's actually just trying to work collectively to reduce the risk.
Amazing.
Yeah.
Philip, you have something to add?
No, I think you got it.
Okay. Awesome. So I think that there's no more. There were quite a lot of questions from the crowd. So I want to thank the audience for listening, and I want to thank both of you, Philip and Dan, for an amazing discussion. I had a great time discussing with you. You know, always a product manager, I'm always excited to talk to clients, to practitioners, and this was amazing on my end. I hope you enjoyed it.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Really.
Awesome. And so thank you very much. Thank you very much to our audience, and have a great day.
You too. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Bye-bye.